Hello, happy Wednesday. I'm so excited to be here and I'm really excited about today's topic. We are going to talk about how to get more active in 2021, but how to do it safe, smart, and sustainably. So you can be ensured to, again, reach your 2021 goals without getting injured or to be in pain. So grab a pen and paper because you're going to want to take notes on this one. So I'll cover kind of 6 main things today. First, we'll talk about I'll define the best types of activity that you should be doing. And again, to be sustainably active and not to get injured or experience any pain. How to exercise smart to avoid injury and pain. Why it's important to begin with the basics and to build a firm foundation when it comes to getting active and exercising, and why a whole body centered programs are the best place to decrease your risk for getting injured or to kind of accumulate all kind of the aches and pains that we oftentimes see. And then I'm going to kind of talk through kind of a program breakdown, about what is kind of a comprehensive kind of whole body centered program looks like, a balanced program. What is that? What does that look like? And then lastly, I'll cover how to easily kind of infuse more activity in an everyday. So again, so you can be more sustainable with how you're active and just so you can be safe. So let's dive in. Again, we haven't met yet, my name is Dr. Yvonne Castillo, and I am a pain-free movement specialist and doctor of physical therapy, and I specialize in helping women over 40 become more active and take back their unstoppable and pain-free lives without kind of any pills, potions, or procedures. So let's dive in. First off, let's talk about the best type of activities to do. And simple enough, the best type of activities to do are things that you love, things that you'll actually do. So if you're not a runner or you don't like swimming, don't force yourself to do those things. If you are, this is what kind of know what you love doing is, are you more of an outdoors person? Do you like more indoor activities? Do you like to be on team sports, or do you need a partner? Do you prefer more one-on-one? How much guidance do you need? Can you just kind of follow a program and just kind of do it on your own, follow along, doing videos? And I know we're a little restricted right now, depending on where you're living, on what you have access to. But there's a lot of different things that you can do out there. But really knowing what you enjoy doing and what you're going to kind of stick with. And then also just kind of what is going to serve your needs for your body, for personally, your mental health. All those things are really important, and try to, again, especially this time of year, this is why I'm doing this series, and you'll see for the month of January, I'm going to dive into a lot deeper into a lot of questions around, like, how do I get started? How do I do it from home? How do I reach my goals when everybody's outlining things? Because there's a lot of, it's just everywhere. It's like 50% off of everything. And it's like the boot camps, the challenges, the quick fixes, like you're going to drop this in this amount of time. Is be really wary of those, especially with those bigger programs. You're just kind of in a mill, you're just in and out. You can kind of get lost. And especially if it's new to you, if the type of activity is new to you, it's a big recipe for disaster. It would break my heart all the time. There's kind of a trainer here where I live in Santa Barbara, and she literally became known as like job security for physical therapists because so many people would get injured. But it would just be like, you can just get pushed on through for 6 to 8 weeks. You're going to lose a bunch of weight. People would grab their friends and they'd go, and I'd watch what people were doing, and people would come to me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you're doing a box jump onto like a 5-foot box jump, and you can't even do a squat a couple inches without your form and everything collapsing. Like, you have no business doing that. So again, perfect example of and I'll cover this when I talk about beginning with the basics, but of just kind of being very wary of going into those things where if you're new to a type of modality, if you're kind of interested in starting, make sure that you start and give yourself the grace to kind of start from the basics, and to give yourself just honoring your body. And also, I always tell my clients, like, you have to be your own advocate, and you have to be okay with if you're having to modify things and to remove that judgment. Sometimes it's like you don't want to be that person that's modifying stuff, but I would rather be quote unquote that person that has to modify and not be injured and not have to end up with surgery, versus being someone that just kind of pushes themselves through it. And I know a lot of times with a lot of trainers and stuff where there is that pressure, and they're not as in-depth trained in the body, so it's really easy to, especially when you're like, oh, there's a goal of, losing weight or something. It's just, oh no, you got to push it, we got to push it. I mean, that's where it's just like coming from a place where you're like, no, I'm going to listen to my body, I'm going to honor my body, and to remove any judgment that comes from it. I think that could be probably the single biggest gift that you could give yourself, and also just to ensure that you don't get injured, or start to accumulate all these little aches and pains, which unfortunately when you do that, and I see this all the time, is people want to push themselves too much and then they get injured. And then what happens? You have to take time off. So it's like, instead of just taking pushing yourself and trying to take too many leaps forward, and then now you're taking twice as much time off, and you're never being consistent enough to ever see any gains. Hi Lynn, how are you doing? So glad you joined. That's where people fall into these kind of like yo-yos when it comes to activities, and then they just end up throwing up their hands like, well, this isn't just going to work for me. And then the talk of like, well, it's my age, it's my body and stuff like that, versus if it was done more strategically, or if there was more an outline plan, you would see the results, you would feel great, and that would be your kind of motivation to keep going forward. So that's kind of where you want to start when we're thinking about, okay, well, what are the best types of activity to be doing? Do something that you love. Do something that's appropriate for your current abilities, your bodies, your needs, and your goals. That's where you want to start. And I'll dive into a little bit more kind of what a balanced program looks like. So next thing that I want to talk about is the SMART principles to keep active and injury and pain-free. And this was included in the blueprint. It's also in the units for blueprints, and you'll see the SMART principles, and they're all outlined there. But I'll go through them now. The masterclass at the end of the month, we're going to dive really deep into the blueprint and break down kind of all the principles that I've included, and just kind of in my framework that has gotten so much success for my clients. We'll go over the exercises, and then you can ask me any questions. So we're going to really dive deep into that, but this will be just a little preview. So to go over the SMART principles, and it's an acronym of SMART, and it's kind of like what I say is kind of the filter or the lens where you should put your activities through, or kind of when you're thinking of, okay, we're exercising too. So the S of the SMART is your season of life. And it's not just like, okay, your season of like age-wise. It could be, are you a new mom? Are you going to be pregnant? Another season of life is like, we're all in COVID. Everything's kind of tossed up in the air. So it's like, that's a certain season of life that brings on certain stressors, either physical, emotional, all those type of things. So you're in a particular season of life. You could be going back to work, you could be in a corporate job, you could be working from home, all those things. That kind of season of life will kind of put you in a particular place, and you need to take that into account when you're measuring that against how you're being active, or maybe how you're not being active. The biggest mistake that I see a lot of people do, and again, time is a big kind of issue with it, is like they'll have to, literally be chained to the desk all day. They're commuting a lot, and so they don't have a lot of time, but then they just want to squeeze in exercise real quick, and they just like go from like 0 to 100. Same thing, I touched on this the other day when I was talking about traveling, where people are in a car a lot, they're on and off planes, and then they want to just throw on their tennis shoes and go run a half marathon. It's like, you can maybe get away with that for a couple seasons of life, but eventually it starts to kind of build that little unraveling thread. These little aches and pains start to come on, and then that's when you start to see the breakdown and the injury. So honoring the season of your life that you're in, and again, in a non-judgmental way, but more of just kind of like, okay, this is where I'm at right now. This is what I'm dealing with in my environment, what I'm personally capable of, where my body is at right now. And then the M is the method. So the method, or kind of the mode of how you're being active. If you're a runner, or if you're doing a lot of cycling, that is pretty dominant running has impact. So we'll kind of talk about, we'll use running as example. So running has a level of, there's high impact in there. So there's a certain impact that it will have on your joints. And then also too, it tends to use a lot of our big muscles on the front of them that kind of like pull us forward. So your hip flexors will get tight, some of your chest muscles will get tight. And if all you're doing is running all the time and you're not balancing that with anything else, then you're gonna find that you're gonna run into pain and injuries. So you wanna make sure, and I'll touch down on this a little bit more when I talk about program breakdowns, that you're not just doing one set activity, but then also too, the volume, the activity. I mean, you could be, running anywhere from, a couple miles a week. Some people run anywhere from 6 to 8 a day. That's a lot of mileage that needs to be balanced out. And if you're not doing that, then it starts to lead to pain and injury. So again, having balance with the method that you're choosing is very important. And then the A of being smart when you're thinking about being active is your age. And I simply say age is a number, and you're going to acknowledge it. There's certain physiological changes, hormonal changes that happen as we age. And if we stick our head in the ground and we just want to put blinders on our age, it doesn't really serve us. I think a lot of times too is age is viewed as a negative thing versus something to celebrate. Like, yes, this is my age and I'm going to own it. And not putting yourself in a category, oh, because I'm a certain age, you can or can't do certain things. I'll never forget in graduate school, I went to UCSF, and I remember in one of our orthopedic classes, they were like, you are orthopedically old at 40. And I remember thinking, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so young. But again, they come from a physiological standpoint where it's like, okay, and I always tell my clients, like, think of it, you've logged 4 decades of life on your body. And I mean, we all have different stories, but that's 4 decades is a lot of different stressors that you may have put your body through. But like I said, with age, there are some physiologic changes that happen with, your muscles, your bones, the extensibility of like your tendons, how stretchy they can be, how flexible you are, kind of the water content in your joints. So that's fact. That happens, but it doesn't necessarily happen at like a set in stone rate. That's where, being healthy, having a good diet and staying and exercising properly, you can kind of set yourself up better. But again, acknowledging that you are a certain age, and that, like I said, you've logged X amount of decades on your body. And then also with age comes in the factor of how quickly you recover from things and you bounce back from things. And I'll talk about this more in another training when I go in to talk about building up your body bank. But that's, so to kind of just like put it in a package is just to say that acknowledge your age and where you're at. And again, that goes back to the not judging, not comparing yourself when you're looking at someone that's older or younger than you. It's just, that's where staying in your lane and knowing your body and owning that is the single best thing that you can do to, again, avoid injuries and stay pain-free. And then the R of being smart is recovery, and recovery is so incredibly important. And I will say that the probably the best indicator of your health is your ability to recover from, either exercising, a stressor, an injury, or an accident. Your ability to bounce back from that is probably the best indicator of your health. So that kind of resilience is really, really, really important. And with recovery is very important to include that into your programming of activity and exercise, but also with your day to day. You always, and this will be a common thing that you'll hear me talk about over and over and over again, is balance. The body seeks balance. When we get out of balance, that's when things start to break down. That's when we see inflammation. That's when we see pain. And that's where it's just unsustainable. The body's basically putting on the kind of, check engine lights of your body saying, okay, something's wrong. And unfortunately, when there is that like imbalance, your body goes into kind of triage mode, and the body is absolutely brilliant, and it will start to draw on different systems to try to counteract what is imbalanced. And that's where it's just not sustainable. The body was meant to operate a certain way. And if it's, the job of your bicep is to do one thing, but then there's some imbalance posturally or something, just to give an example, and now it's trying to do the job of a different muscle, what it was intended to, you can only do that for so long before you run into breakdown, inflammation, tears, or a serious injury. So that's why recovery and kind of making sure that you're baking in recovery into your day-to-day activities. And again, that's not just exercise, but that also counts for being sedentary, again, being strapped to your desk, having to commute. You need to do things to make sure that you are still coming to that happy, like I say, baseline and being balanced. And then also balancing out and recovering from your activities. So again, like I said, if you're a runner, runners tend to be really tight in a lot of their muscles. They tend to kind of blow forward. You need to be doing things to balance, to open yourself up. And same thing, you need to be doing things to make sure that you are balancing out, just using the same muscles over and over and over again. And I'll touch into that a little bit later today. And then the T is time. When we talk about what does it mean to be smart when you exercise and thinking about time. And again, that goes back to being balanced with how much you're moving and how much you're not moving. You wanna be at least doing some sort of activity for anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes a day. It does not have to be continuous, and I'll talk about that in a little bit later. But you want to get up and move. That's why I love like a lot of the apps that you can do where you can track your steps. Having a little bit of a reminder on your phone to just pop up and move a little bit, but you want to do some sort of activity for at least 20 to 30 minutes every single day. And again, with how much you're doing, you also want to put that against into what type you're doing. How intensive activity are you doing? Again, because it's not sustainable. Again, if you are doing something where it's high impact, it's pretty intense on your body, running 2 hours every single day is not sustainable, and it's gonna lead to some other things breaking down. And to go back to talking about balancing things, it's an interesting thing when people are training for marathons, and that will take, again, you're probably running anywhere when you're getting to your latter stages of training, anywhere from 2 to 3 hours sometimes, depending on your pace a day. And people will come in and see me, and I'm like, okay, well, what are you doing? Because they're often so incredibly tight and wound up. I'm like, okay, well, how much are you stretching? And it's like, okay, a minute or two of stretching is not gonna undo like just pounding the pavement and just tightening yourself up for 3 hours. Like there's a disconnect on balancing that. So you're going to be finding yourself spending a lot more time trying to offset the activity that you've done. You can say the same thing about kind of if you're stuck at your desk for literally 12 hours straight, just a minute or two, it's not going to undo what you've been doing for that long. So that's when we're talking about time, is making sure too that the volume that you're doing, and again, based on the frequency or the intensity, that you're balancing it with other things, making sure that you're not overdoing it and that you do give yourself rest days so you can recover. It's back to the R again. That's very, very important, and it's okay to have rest days. That's a part of the thing that will help you actually reach your goals, because if you constantly are just overstressing your body, it's not going to help. Oh, and that was another thing I remembered. Also too, if you're overstressing your body, and when it comes to exercise too, it'll have a counterproductive effect too, because it will start to change your hormones out. And so that's why some people, they're like, I'm exercising so much, I'm eating so good, but they're still not losing the weight, because they've somewhat kind of they're overstressing their body enough where they kind of offset their hormones. And that's why sometimes, even while people are quote unquote exercising a lot and doing all the right things, that they actually are overstressing their body too much, where it can't give itself time to kind of like heal, repair, and then kind of make forward improvement. So that's something to keep in mind, and that's something that I'll dive into a little bit more. But yeah, so that is kind of SMART principles of how to kind of exercise and keep active without getting injured and or coming into kind of pain and through there. And then let's talk about why it's important to begin from the basics and build a firm foundation. And this, for just like a common theme of it, sometimes when you are starting for the first time, you're going into a new environment, there can be a lot of pressure not to be kind of like the odd person out. It can feel a little bit awkward, and you don't know what quite you're doing. And sometimes, and unfortunately, I feel like people put on themselves a lot, like that there's this, it's terrible to have to modify or to like grab a prop to help you, or not to like do all the reps or something. So again, to give yourself that grace and to stand in that place of knowing and owning that is like probably the most powerful thing that you can do for yourself. And then also removing expectations can be such a detrimental thing of just like, okay, well, I'm not moving and not making enough improvements, or like a time-based thing to there. So giving yourself just that grace when you are starting out. And I also like to challenge myself is like just working a little bit deeper, and what can you, there's so much, and you'll hear me say like beauty in the basics. And I teach Pilates, and you'll see a lot of the movement classes that I do are kind of foundational exercises and Pilates based. And I mean, the most challenging classes I ever take or teach are just a basic beginner's class, because the better you get at it, you work deeper. And I would challenge yourself to kind of really try to fine tune your foundation, because everything after that just gets so much easier and you get so much more out of it. I see, especially now, like there's the HIIT classes are super popular. And you know, everybody wants to do these like quick in the boot camps and the circuits and stuff like that. But I literally tell people, and when I work with clients, and you kind of actually really start from that foundation, you ask them, you know, to do a squat or to do a movement, and they're all over the place. A classic thing is like with runners, you know, and they like, oh, you know, I can do a marathon or whatever. You think, okay, they must be really strong, and then you break down and you actually have them do a squat or single leg squat, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, you run on those legs, because your legs like collapse in, and they just like, it's just not great. I'm like, oh well, no wonder you have knee pain. But I mean, that's what I see with like a lot of people, is like they're literally just like throwing their bodies through space, and they're not really getting any value out of it, versus actually being intentional with the movements that they're doing and really recruiting the right muscles, doing the right patterns. You'll get far more benefit out of it. And same thing when you're thinking about results, is like if you are doing things with the wrong form, or you're skipping steps, you're not getting any value out of it. And that's why you won't see any results, because you're not fulfilling the intention of the movement. And I think sometimes too is people don't understand the why behind the movement, the form of the movements, and that's a big piece too. Because you don't just want to, and that's the beauty. That's why I love Pilates. And you'll see with a lot of the movement classes that I teach, that it's all fine and well when you know, or you're in a class, but you want to be able to have it translate to everything else that you do outside of, you know, a class or a movement. Is like you want to have that translate to, you know, picking your kids up off, you know, the floor, to doing a load of laundry, to loading the dishwashers. You want to be basically training your body to do all those movements appropriately, efficiently, and correctly. So you're not, like I say, just like throwing your body through space, because that's why people get injured. That's classically why, you know, people, you know, oh, I literally had a guy, I picked up a piece of cheese off the floor, and that's how he herniated a disc. So yeah. And so that's why it's important to be doing things that are functionally based, and then to be present while you're doing the movements. And again, not to just be haphazardly always trying to keep up with what's the next thing, and just kind of rushing through a class or through exercises and stuff like that. But to be present and be intentional them, that's where you're going to be finding more of the value. If that makes sense, kind of give me a little thumbs up, or let me know. And if you have any questions, just drop them below. And then also the next point is whole body centered programs. And this is really important, because what I tend to see is a lot of people, I mean, just like anything, you do more of what you love doing. And it's easy just to kind of do that one thing instead of being balanced in doing like a whole body program. And then also kind of making sure that you are doing a program that is balanced in regards to doing like cardio and strength training and mobility and like stretching and flexibility work. So that's a big piece. Like some people, it's just like, oh, they prefer to play tennis. So all they want to do all the time is I just play tennis, just play tennis, just play tennis, but not really doing the foundational pieces and doing the other pieces that will keep a program balanced. And then it's like, well, if you're just running all the time, that's a lot of lower body work, and you're really neglecting a lot of your upper body. Same thing with cycling. That's a pretty lower body dominant big muscle group, and you're neglecting a lot of your upper body and your kind of postural strength and your core and stuff like that. So you want to make sure that you're doing a program that is kind of targeting everything from head to toe, you isolating and targeting certain muscle groups and certain body parts, but then also as like a whole, kind of teaching you how to use your body and perform kind of bigger movements as a whole, because again, we're not just an arm that reaches into a cupboard. That arm is attached to a full body, so everything's connected, as I say, fortunately and unfortunately. We always want to just use that to our benefit, and that kind of goes into like my methodology. Why I have the 3S mobility method is you always want to do a program that incorporates some sort of self-soft tissue work. So where you're first kind of releasing any area of restriction, and then you want to move into stretches, so focused, targeted stretches, and then you want to do some sort of stabilization or strengthening. You need to do those three things. If you're missing any one of those three things out of your kind of activity regime, you're gonna run into pain, injury, and breakdown. Also, what's incredibly important, and that's what I focus on in my mobility method, is that the exercises are targeted. They target a specific muscle group, they target a specific action, versus just kind of these very generalized or gross movements in through there, because muscles have a specific function, and if they can get kind of lost in just kind of generalized movements, and you need to isolate them out, especially when it comes to doing release work, doing stretches, and doing strengthening. I think a lot of times people are like, oh, I need to get more mobility, I need to be more flexible. Okay, I'm just gonna do yoga. And I'm like, ugh. And I go back and forth with that. There's value in it. It's just hard, because when you're already so tight, and there's a lot of planted movement and torsioning movements, and again, it's just kind of big gross body movements, and it's not really isolated out. It's really easy to kind of cheat and kind of wiggle out of things, and people will be like, oh, I'm super flexible, I can do all these things. But then when you really kind of test them and do stuff like that, I'm like, oh, no. A classic example is like when people go to stretch their hamstrings and they're like, oh yeah, like I can bend down and touch the ground, and I'm like, well, that's just your spine curving down, versus like it actually being your hamstrings that are stretching. That's like perfect example that I see all the time. So you really want to kind of target and isolate those muscles. Also, when you're consistent in doing a program where you're strategically targeting and releasing muscles and strategically targeting and stretching muscles, you will be able to narrow down and see differences from side to side. And I'm gonna say that again. You'll be able to see, it's gonna be like a litmus test, where you'll be seeing differences from side to side. And that's such an important thing, because my whole goal is I want to give you the tools, and I want you to know how to use them, and I want you to know how to know your body, and kind of being able to kind of work for yourself. Okay, like say you're at a computer and you mouse all the time this time, and you're constantly turned like that, and you're like, oh my gosh, my neck is so sore. I always get this pain right here and this pain right here. And it's included in the blueprint. But if you do some rolling where you're releasing that pec, you're gonna probably find that this side is very, very sensitive, and maybe not so sensitive on this side. And then same thing for the back. And so you can kind of go, okay, well, that pattern and that positioning is putting me in that position. And as you work on it, you should start to see that the level of sensitivity is down, that it's not as painful, and it kind of holds you honest and true. And if you consistently are doing it, it's kind of like you'll be able to kind of get that feedback for your body. What is sore? What is tight? What is sensitive? What is kind of like when you're rolling over it, like kind of like ka-chunk or something, because a muscle's so tight. That little like litmus test is so important, and it also gives you great feedback if you're just like, oh, I'm making like changes in my body that you may not necessarily see visually, but you'll start to see like, oh wow, that's starting to feel a little bit different. And same thing with the stretching, where you start to see differences from side to side, that if you're, really tight in your right hamstring versus your left hamstring, it's like, okay, well, how am I sitting? How am I walking? What are my patterns? What are my dominant leg? And then as you kind of do targeted kind of the release work, the stretch work, you'll start to see things balancing out. And I teach it in that certain order, where it's like you want to do the release work first, and then you want to do the stretching, and then you want to do your stabilization work. Because you can imagine, if you are so tight and bound up, it's going to be really hard to try to do movements if you are so tight. So that's why it's kind of like you have to peel the layers away. I mean, we can only be so strong as we have the range to move in. So that is why, is you want to release what's restricted, you want to work through that full range of motion, and then you want to retrain and then strengthen yourself through that kind of newfound motion there. So that's why we go through those 3 phases in that order. And that's that's more of a whole body program in through there. And that will help prepare you to do a lot of the other, activities that you do, whether that's running or cycling or Pilates, all kind of like the fun activities. That's kind of your baseline into there, but that's a balanced program that you're going to want to do. And then so to talk and dive into program breakdown, when you're thinking, okay, well, I want to be active, what does a balanced program look like? And I touched on this a little bit, but doing cardio for about 15-20 minutes, and you're going to want to do that to kind of, you could do that daily, would be fantastic. 3 to 4 times a week is great. And doing it where you're kind of getting your heart rate up enough. I'm sure you've heard about the talk test, but where you can have a conversation, but you're kind of still like it's kind of a little bit hard to get your words out and through there. And so you can, get your heart rate up to a place where it's elevated as well, where you'll see some of those metabolic changes and those cardiovascular changes, all the good changes in the bodies that we see. And then strength training as well. You want to be doing 3 to 4 times a week. You can be changing up the major muscle groups that you're using, your arms, your legs, your core. The bigger the muscles that you're using, and doing them and stressing them with a certain amount of resistance and rate. Again, it's helpful for your muscles, for your bones, building muscle mass, building bone mass, and also the kind of added benefit of doing strength training is even after you're done doing your strength training exercises, you'll still see kind of a caloric burn, kind of an uptick in your metabolism, which is really helpful when we're normalizing things like blood sugar, hormones, and so forth. So cardio, strength training, and then you always want to have a kind of some sort of a piece of stretching and mobility work in through there. And I kind of just touched on it, but you want to make sure that you're doing that every single day. And again, you want to be doing enough of it where it's balancing out kind of the activities that you're doing, or like I say, that you're not doing. So if you are super sedentary, you want to make sure you're doing all the right things to make sure that you're opening up. Again, a lot of texting, a lot of computer work, a lot of Zoom work. You want to make sure that you're doing enough to kind of balance yourself out. And like I said, it needs to be targeted versus just generalized movements. Alignment is very key, making sure that you're present and that your posture, and again, like we talked about, having that good foundation, knowing the movements that you should be doing, the proper form of them is really critical. And then I talk about that you need to target your 3 cores. I say that you have 3 cores. So your primary core, we think of like kind of your abdominals and your pelvic floor. And I'll dive into this deeper in a later training. And then your kind of 2 secondary cores that I like to say is you have your shoulder. And you have this arm that moves, but it's attached to your torso. And I kind of say your shoulder, working your shoulder is very important, because the stronger you are here, anything that you do externally, you'll be able to do that better and stronger. And then your other secondary core is your hip. And there's a lot of muscles in there that seek to kind of stabilize, support, and allow you to have that much mobility through your lower legs. So those are really important. And you'll see me as we go through more of the trainings and then some of the movement classes that I'll talk about those a little bit more. But you want to always incorporate, I say you have 3 cores. Your primary core is your center, and then you kind of have two more, which kind of hold your limbs in place. And if there's issues in either of those places, that's where you tend to run into rotator cuff injuries, numbness and tingling, elbow injuries, neck injuries, and then same thing with down below. It's oftentimes any weakness or imbalance or tightness or restriction in your hip is probably the real reason most people have kind of knee, ankle, foot issues, back, sciatica, stuff like that. And I'll talk about that even more, but that's just a little tease there. And then lastly, how do you kind of infuse more activity throughout the day? So if you start with doing things that you love, it's going to be easy because it won't be such a slog to kind of try to motivate yourself to do them. Another thing is where I talked about it yesterday is literally set yourself up where you're tripping over whatever you need to do. If you're walking, make sure that you've got those shoes set up, you've got yourself all set up the day before. If you're going into work, it's easy to pack a pair of walking shoes and walk on your lunch break. That's such a great way to not only clear your mind, but also do something good for your body, get some fresh air. And I touched on a little bit, but you don't have to do your exercises all in one chunk. I know it can be overwhelming for a lot of people. It's oh my gosh, I have to carve out an hour, 45 minutes. I have to commute there and commute back. It's it doesn't have to be such a chore. And I think just starting out small and I say, kind of baking your exercises into your day or kind of sprinkling throughout the day is really beneficial. Setting a timer on your phone to kind of get up and do, I say, a posture break or a movement break. I would give my clients all the time, okay, I call them your bathroom break exercises. Every single time you get up to go for a bathroom break, if you just did one stretch or one little postural reset, it really adds up and it makes a big difference. And same thing, while the coffee's dripping and pouring down in the morning, can you do a couple squats? Can you work on a little bit of balance? Oftentimes, when I'm cooking at home, cooking dinner at home, while stuff is cooking or boiling or baking, I'll grab my bands. I will do some squats. I will do some of my hip stabilizing exercises. There's a lot of easy things that you can do. And again, you want to be present, not kind of multitasking, but you want to be present up so you do the things right. But it's easy where you can kind of just sprinkle them through the day. And I think if you release yourself, where okay, I have to carve out 45 minutes. And if I don't do it, it's then it turns back to that all or nothing type of a thing where people are well, I don't have 45 minutes, so I just can't exercise, versus something always counts, and just celebrate what you're able to do. And just again, give yourself the grace, because if you've got kids or a job or stress or anything, life happens. Don't just feel okay, well, I didn't do it today, so now I'm just gonna totally just throw my hands up and stuff like that. The consistency of it is super important. But again, doing what you can do and make sure that it's easy to do, that you set some timers to remind yourself to kind of do it, schedule it on your calendar and your phone. And again, getting any kind of equipment or, shoes or anything that you need. And that's also where it's really helpful to have somebody to hold you accountable to. And again, depending with current situation and stuff like that, but even if you just check in with a friend and hey, I'm going for a walk, whether or not you guys can do it together, but at least hold you, did you get your steps in today, or something like that, where you're kind of checking in with each other. I think it's great. Use this community to do that, to kind of say what you want to do and kind of to kind of hold each other accountable for that, just to make sure that you're kind of reaching your goals and to celebrate each other. It's really great to have someone cheer you along when you're when you do what you say you're going to do and you do it consistently. So I think it's a big accomplishment. So just to kind of recap, today we talked about kind of defining what are the best type of activities to do, how to exercise smart, why it's important to begin with the basics and to build a firm foundation, why whole body centered programs are the best to start with, to make sure that you reduce your risk of pain and getting injured. We talked a little bit of program breakdown about the different facets of an exercise program that you should make sure that you're doing, and then also just how to easily just kind of infuse more activity throughout your day. So I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, I can't see the comments right now. Facebook just drives me bananas sometimes. Pop them down below. I'll also be putting a post up too, because Lynn, you voted on it. So and I think someone else, we had a couple votes for a better back and core class. So that's what I'm going to be teaching tomorrow. I'll give you more of the details in through there. And I know you guys, there's a couple intake questions that people had. So I'm specifically going to put that into the movement class that we do tomorrow. I'm really excited for it. So thank you so much for joining me today. Hopefully this was helpful. I'll post this in a group. And then also just some information for our first movement class tomorrow, which I'm super excited. So have a beautiful Wednesday, and I will see you guys soon. Okay, bye.